And then you hear the screaming, you fucker, you motherfucker, you motherfucker.
Mike Rinder and the Church of Scientology, he exposes them like no one I've ever heard. You know our last episode where we interviewed Ron Miscavige, the father of David Miscavige? Well, Mike Rinder gives his take, and I really don't want you to miss it. Shelly Miscavige, where is she? The wife of David Miscavige. What happened to Mike Rinder that caused him to wake up in all that cognitive dissonance? And let me tell you, drinking the Kool-Aid can keep people stuck. The emotional turmoil that he must have experienced, and everyone who tries to escape a cult like this, they all share something in common, something really deep that touches all of us. And I hope you guys share this content because someone out there probably needs to see it. We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert. Ladies and gentlemen, you could see the kind of caliber we brought to the show today. I hope you guys hit that like button, subscribe. I cannot wait to hear what we're going to delve into today. The Church of Scientology is an enormous cult with lots of money, and they've caused plenty of people harm. So let's go ahead and introduce our guest. David Samuels, my co-host today. David, welcome to the show, man. And we'll have you introduce Mike and go from there. How are you doing, brother?
I'm great, man. Thank you. And great to be on. And thank you, Mike, for coming on. Awesome to have you on, man. We recently had on Ron Miscavige, actually. So you know Ron.
Yes,
that was a blast.
Well.
We had a great time with Ron. He even played us a little trumpet at the end. He's a cool guy. We keep in contact on Skype now. I sent him. He loves Vegemite, but he can only get Marmite. So I sent him a couple of tubs of Vegemite, and he was so grateful from that. You know, for me sending him that. So that was pretty cool. Mike, man, you're from Adelaide in South Australia. So this is where I live. Of all places in the world, you were born in Adelaide. Tell us about that. Like, I think you were there. You were born there, and then you kind of left around about 6.
No, I was born there, David, and I lived there most of my life, except for a time that I lived, well, most of my, youth, except for a time that I lived in Sydney for half a year, and then in England a couple of times for a year or 6 months. But no, I'm a born and raised Crow, and, I went to school at Burnside Primary School, and then
Burnside. I lived in Burnside. I lived on Waterfall Terrace.
Yeah, well, when I went to Burnside Primary, we lived in Stonyfell, and then we moved to Wattle Park, and I went to King's College back when it was an all-boys school before it became, I think it's called Pembroke now. And
yeah, Pembroke, yeah.
That was my life. And, I used to go to the Adelaide cricket ground, and I followed Sturt, and I was like
the Devil Blues.
A homegrown Adelaide, and there is you're maybe the only other person on planet Earth that I've met that's from Adelaide. It's like, like I was telling Derek, it's like being from Omaha, Nebraska. Like, nobody's from Adelaide.
Well, I hate to disappoint you, Mike, but I'm a West Adelaide. I'm a Bloods fan, so I think we beat you in the '83 grand final. But anyway.
Well, I'm resigning now. I'm leaving this podcast, and it was nice chatting with you while it lasted. But certain things just go that way. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, man. I'm a Bloods fan, but anyway.
Wow.
So that's awesome. So my kids were also born in Burnside Memorial Hospital, so it's just crazy. So you lived in Adelaide. When did you move to? Because you moved. Your parents were Scientologists. How did you get involved in this religion?
Well, interestingly, when we lived in Stonyfell, our next door neighbor in 1959, and that tells you how old I am because I was actually alive in 1959. Our next door neighbor went to Melbourne to see L. Ron Hubbard deliver a series of lectures. He was touring the world, spouting off about Dianetics and Scientology, and our neighbor went, and he came back with these great tales of, oh my God, this is the most incredible thing, and this guy's discovered the answers to the universe, and not only the answers to the universe, but the answers on how you can be happier and raise better children, and et cetera, et cetera. The sort of usual pitch that goes along with Scientology, which is that it is not only, I mean, Scientology calls itself an, quote, applied religious philosophy. And this is sort of a bit of trickery that helps to kind of put Scientology in a context that people will find acceptable. That it's not too threatening to, if they're already in a religion of, you know, they've been raised in a certain religion, it's not too threatening to say it's an applied religious philosophy. Philosophy sounds kind of cool, like a thinking person's thing, and it's applied so you can do it in the here and now. You don't have to wait until you die and go to heaven. And like these things are the pitches that Scientology has, you know, became very adept at, and convincing people that there was a solution to their problems. And everybody's got problems. No matter what they are, Scientology has the answer and the solution. And I don't know exactly what my parents found exciting or interesting about it to begin with, but from the age of, well, I was 4 then, they sort of really didn't get involved for a year or two seriously, and then I started becoming what I would call a member of a Scientology family when I was 6, and that was how I was raised. I was raised with the principles of Scientology being the overriding guiding principles of how you conduct yourself, because one thing about L. Ron Hubbard, he wrote and talked and lectured about everything. Like every single thing that you can possibly imagine, he had his take on, and his take, in the eyes of Scientologists, is the only take. There's only one right way of doing or thinking about anything, and that's the way that Ron Hubbard says to do it. And he spouted forth on practically everything you can think of. So a lot of my life was spent doing what most Scientologists do, which is when confronted with something in life, going, what would Ron do? And then going to the numerous books and references that Hubbard had put out into the world, and finding the answer contained within there. So my life was a sort of a preordained course. It's not easy as a young child to buck what you are being taught by your parents. You know, they have enormous influence over your thinking and your approach to life and the way that you view things and how you conduct yourself. And it sort of becomes so ingrained that it just, everybody else seems abnormal and you're the only one that seems normal.
Wow.
I mean, that's the best way I can think to describe it. You're the normal person. Everybody else out there who doesn't have this wisdom of Ron is the abnormal, unfortunate, uneducated, desperate, sad, and they don't know it person. And this is, I believe, the fundamental concept that every cult employs. It's an us versus them world. We have all the answers. You have none. And you only object to our answers because you're still uneducated. You don't really understand what they are and what they mean. And if you would just get yourself educated, you would come to realize that we do have all the answers to everything.
If you only knew what we knew, then you'd understand. And
exactly.
Yeah,
that's exactly right, Derek.
This is well said, Mike. I got to ask, because you obviously met, what you're saying is anachronistic in a sense. I love this because you now know. And the way that you have said this, I can tell. And I just read people. I'm a pretty good people person. I can tell there's not only sincerity, but honesty. And I can relate to the experience that you're saying. That's how I know it's true, what you're actually relaying. So any naysayers out there, and of course, there's always an agenda from the Scientologist to try and take you out. They're not taking you out. They're not taking you, or they're just causing more flame to engulf, and you are just going to do more outspeaking and stuff. So I really appreciate that. When you met L. Ron Hubbard, I suspect you weren't thinking what you're thinking now. You thought this guy was the best thing on earth, right?
Oh, not just on Earth, in the entire universe.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's not an exaggeration, Derek. Like, Scientologists believe that this is there is a vast universe, and that L. Ron Hubbard is the first person, entity, being, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, who has unlocked the secrets to the universe. And that he even says, there is a very famous writing that he did that everybody in Scientology has to read at the beginning of every course that they ever do, or every time they go in, and it's called Keeping Scientology Working. And it is this 7-page thing that Hubbard wrote about how he came to develop Scientology. And in it, he says, look, I rose above everybody else, and I came up with the answers to your problems and mankind's problems and the problems of the universe. And how I came about doing that isn't really important. It's just the fact that I did. And this is like gospel to Scientologists. It is the idea that Hubbard knows you better than you know yourself, that he understands you better than you understand yourself. And only if you study all of what he said about how you are the way you are, will you be able to understand yourself. And then you still won't ever catch up to him, because he's advanced on to the next thing of how the universe is the way that it is, et cetera, et cetera. So Hubbard is this very revered figure in Scientology. Like all cult leaders, he is infallible. His word is the word of God, effectively. Though Scientology takes great pains, and Hubbard also took great pains to make statements like, I'm not a god, I'm just a man. And I don't wish to be treated as a god, and I just wish to be treated as a man. But that wasn't really true. He did want to be treated as a god. In other words, he wanted to be treated as infallible and unquestionable and unquestioned, but he didn't want the baggage that goes along with that. So he said, I'm not a god, I'm just a man. But really, he wanted to be treated like a god, and is treated like a god in pretty much all respects by Scientologists. So
similar to the Kim Jong dynasty in North Korea, really, in a way.
Yeah, you know, my good friend John Sweeney of the BBC did 2 undercover programs in North Korea, and he wrote a book about it. And I've talked to him extensively about this, because he's one of the few people that I know who has immersed himself in the world of Scientology with his programs on Panorama about Scientology, and also being undercover in North Korea to do programs about the regime in North Korea. I said, John, like, how does this compare? Oh, well, I wasn't as freaked out in North Korea as I was when I was doing Scientology.
What?
No way. Wow.
And he said, you know, the similarities are remarkable. I mean,
That's a big statement.
David, if you go to a Scientology event which is they hold these events routinely throughout the year to brief the Scientologists on what's going on in the world. And there's a bunch of it.
They have a church on North Terrace, by the way, in Adelaide.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think they brought a building somewhere down by Port Adelaide, but they haven't moved in. They do this routinely, and if you ever have time, I'll explain to you the Scientology real estate strategy.
Yeah, well, Mike, North Terrace, and that is evolved big time. That is probably the most prime real estate in Adelaide, North Terrace. That's like, they've got a church there, but yeah,
whatever.
Yeah, we're talking about Scientology.
They may have a building there, but there's nobody in it.
Nobody in it, yeah.
That's what I meant by the whatever. It doesn't matter how prime the real estate is. There's nobody in these places. They are become a real estate empire rather than a real thinking or thought empire. It's an empire of bricks and mortar rather than an empire of ideas now. But I was saying that if you go to these Scientology events, and, I used to speak at those things. These days, it's just Miscavige. But back in the day, there was a bunch of us that used to talk at those. And all the Scientologists would be basically browbeaten into showing up for these events 5 or 6 times a year. And David Miscavige would walk out on stage, and instantly everybody would be on their feet, applauding. Oh, they're like, I call them club seals, but they're like trained seals, like they just sort of stand up and cheer and shout. And in the middle of, as he's going along and talking about, and we have, 4 miles of wiring that we have installed in this new building. And these things look remarkably like those events that you see where Kim Jong-un or whoever the current leader of the cult of North Korea goes and does these highly orchestrated, organized events, and everybody is standing up and cheering. They've got tears coming down their face.
Yeah,
they're so overwhelmed with the emotion of the moment and the incredible things that are being presented to them, and it's all bullshit. And that's the same. It's the same technique that's used in Scientology. These events have these incredible announcements. We talked about this on the Aftermath when we did an episode with Mark Headley, because Mark Headley and I both used to work on putting together these events. We talked about the bullshit and how it's bullshit and how things are presented in a fashion to make everybody get in the, oh my God, we're taking over the world. Oh my God, we're just doing so much good for planet Earth. We're the saviors of mankind. And Scientologists really believe that. They do believe that they are saving mankind.
Yeah.
And
that's what you believe. See, what you're saying there is powerful, because you're saying you were preparing these things and you were so involved in the cult. You literally thought you were doing good. No, make it look better than that. No, enhance that. No, say we had more members. And you're really thinking you're doing good by lying. Like,
right, absolutely.
That's so powerful.
Absolutely, Derek. There is no question. Wow. And this is something that I've said very, very often. And, I was the international spokesperson for Scientology for like 20 years. So I have a pretty good background to talk about this subject. But every Scientologist will, and just mark my words, every Scientologist will lie if it is protecting Scientology or doing something that they think will forward the aims of Scientology. They will lie. And that includes in front of a court, that includes to the police, that includes in deposition, that includes on national television. I mean, I did it numerous times on national TV. And you believe that the end justifies the means. The means justifies the ends. It doesn't even matter which way around you go. If it's good for Scientology, it's good, and it's not wrong. And
is
lying
that called fair game?
Well, that's part of fair game. That's
it can be part of it, but it's not. He's saying in every aspect of Scientology, I see the same trait. I like to relate stuff to other people who might relate to this that watch my show. Yeah. I see the same trait with religious, okay? Whatever the religion might be, or their brand, their flavor, their Kool-Aid, and they're going to do whatever they can while they're drinking the Kool-Aid. Like you were drinking the Kool-Aid of Scientology, I was drinking the Kool-Aid of this particular cult of Christianity or whatever. And like we would do anything to hold that truth and what the truth we thought was true, even if we were lying about it. And what I found interesting is one day, I think the Kool-Aid didn't taste the same, or something happened to me where I said, hold on, one of the characteristics that I'm supposed to believe about this thing is really to search the truth, right? The truth will set you free. And for you, it was a different, I think, transition. There were the mistreatment. I'm not sure what happened, but I want to know, like, what do you think it was ultimately? And it may not have been one event, but something tipped you over the edge, Mike, that made you go from this is my life to, okay, I'm uneasy about this. What the hell's going on with me? I am experiencing something that is putting me at odds against my religious, or if you will, my Church of Scientology.
We call that waking up in the Jehovah's Witness community. So,
well, let me just, I'll answer your question, Derek.
Okay.
It's not, it may not be a short answer, but I'll answer it. But let me just give a little foundation for that first, which is when I was 18, I joined what's called the C organization of Scientology. And this is like the inner core of Scientology, sort of like, I don't know, the Vatican for the Catholic Church. The people who are 100% dedicated to Scientology, you live communally, you work 24 hours a day, 365 days a year for Scientology. You don't get paid anything or, like a stipend, $50 a week. If you're lucky, you work full time for Scientology, and they provide everything. They provide your food. They provide your housing. They provide your health care. So you, as a Sea Org member, become a part of, on one hand, this group of people who, it's somewhat inspiring to be a part of such a close-knit, dedicated group of people, all in lockstep to attain or work towards the same thing. That's a very empowering dynamic of life. Very empowering. And it is a very powerful glue that holds you in place. The fact that
at age 18, did you sign the billion-year contract, Mike?
Yep.
At age 18?
Yes, at age 18.
So you can't, in America, you can't even drink alcohol until you're 21. Yet you're signing.
Yeah, well, that's what they say in theory.
Yet you're signing a billion-year contract as a teenager.
Correct, and that was like a preordained thing. My view was ultimately I would, as a good Scientologist and as like the oldest son of a prominent Scientology family, I was going to go join L Ron Hubbard in the C organization and work directly with him to achieve the aims of Scientology. So that, understand, is a real hold on members of the C organization, because you are all the time surrounded with people who have exactly the same view about everything. And if you deviate from that view, you quickly realize that maybe I'm out of step. And this idea of being out of step with everybody else is also a powerful clue that keeps people stuck in whatever it is that they're in. You know, peer pressure is enormously powerful. It's enormous. I mean, that Stanford experiment is an astonishing thing that people still refer to, 50 or 60 or 70 years later, because it's so stark.
Isn't this the theory? And I don't want to detract you because I know you're getting to your point. There was video I saw, like black and white video, when you were young, No, I'm just kidding. Had to jab. Anyway, I'm being funny.
That was when I was old.
So they had this video camera where they got a random participant.
The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with a white shirt, the lady with a trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality, but little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera staff, 3 of them at least. And this man has apparently been in groups before. Now, here's a fella with his hat on in the elevator. First he makes a full turn to the rear, and Charlie closes the door. A moment later, we'll open the door, everybody's changed positions. Now we'll see if we can use group pressure for some good. Now, in a moment, on Charlie's signal, everybody turns forward. There, notice, they take off their hats. And now, do you think we could reverse the procedure? Watch.
Yeah. Well, the Stanford Prison Experiment is, and anybody can look it up. You can Google it. It is where they took these students and told them that they were prison guards and they were watching over these prisoners, and these prisoners were part of the experiment. And they were told that what they were supposed to do was increasingly torture these people and like give them electric shocks and like do terrible things to them. It wasn't really happening. It was all acted out. But these people were going along with this, and it's just fascinating to see. But my point, to go back, was you asked originally, so what was it that caused the breaking point? And I wanted you to understand a little that there was a lot of factors involved in this, because I had a wife. I had 2 children that I had raised in the Sea Org. They didn't join when they were 18. They were born into it. So the abuses, the physical and mental and verbal abuses got increasingly outrageous as time went on, particularly in the early 2000s. And then a long sort of series of events. And I'd mentioned John Sweeney earlier, but John Sweeney plays an interesting role in my life, because I was in London with to represent Scientology when John Sweeney was doing his Panorama program. And I had been interacting with him when he was in the United States. And then when he went back to London, I was told I had to go to London to do this. And he showed up at one of the Scientology buildings in London, what they call the Test Center in Tottenham Court Road. And he had a camera crew and his producer. And he sort of came to the doorstep and was asking questions. And I got called and I rushed over there, and he starts very, very intensively saying, you know, I've got on good authority and I've spoken to people, and people have told me that David Miscavige has physically assaulted you. And how do you respond to that?
Allegations are absolute, utter rubbish. Absolute, utter rubbish.
And I, you know, this is also all over YouTube. You can see it. I'm going, that's an absolute lie, and we'll sue you if you run that, and blah, 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 blah. And meanwhile, in the back of my mind, I'm going, you know, I know the people that he talked to. I know Bruce Hines. I know Jeff Hawkins. I know these guys that John Sweeney has spoken to. And I know they were there in the same room with me while they were getting the shit kicked out of them and I was getting the shit kicked out of me. And I'm standing here on what's effectively international TV saying, no, this is just a lie. And being all aggressive, and we'll sue you about it. And I walked out of that and I went, you know, I've told a lot of lies in my time, but I always felt they were pretty justified. Like, I wouldn't ever admit anything about the secret OT teachings of Scientology. Now,
Or Xenu.
I'm on the Today Show with Katie Couric, and she's asking me about Xenu and OT3, and I'm going, no, nothing like that. Don't know anything about it. And
I know that, according to my research, L. Ron Hubbard, the father of Scientology, claimed that humans are immortal spiritual beings composed of body, mind, and spirit. But he also claimed that 75 million years ago, an evil galactic ruler named Xenu killed billions of his people by sending them to Earth in space planes. You can understand why some people might feel this is, at best, pretty unconventional, and I guess at worst, just plain out there, right?
I can understand that, certainly, Katie. That just has no basis in reality. This is one of those things that gets spread around, one of those old stories that gets run around.
Wrote about that?
No, not in those terms. There is an alteration and twisting of things.
That to me was very well justified. This was a justifiable lie because Hubbard says that if you're not prepared to have that information, that it can be not just spiritually harmful to you, you can die. And Scientologists believed that. And I believed it at the time. And I was like, I can't say anything about this and hurt people. And there I am standing there going, you know, did I really join the Sea Organization to defend this little punk that is beating people up and physically assaulting them? Like, there's something like the dissonance in my brain just sort of started going into overload at that moment, going, what the fuck am I doing? And then going, yeah, but I can't leave because I can't abandon my kids. I'm in London. Yeah. What the fuck am I going to do? I'm sorry. I'm swearing like a...
You're good. No, this is a raw...
It's all good. Mike, just want to rewind a little bit. When L. Ron Hubbard passed away, was David Miscavige always going to be the successor, or did you throw your hat? Did you throw your hat in what's the process of, you know, how like the Pope, the Catholics have like they got a vote, and Jehovah's Witnesses have a governing body of 8 members, and you got to so he wasn't always going to be the planned successor of Hubbard. What's the process of becoming the next Scientology Pope? Because obviously Miscavige will one day, move on, and there'll be another Scientology leader or whatever you want to call it. Did you just out of curiosity, did you ever throw your hat in the ring to kind of
that's a good question.
Be David, be the lead, let's call it the Pope of Scientologists. No, you didn't.
No, I didn't. And let me just explain something to you. The process of taking over from L. Ron Hubbard is a process that's more aptly described in the book Lord of the Flies than in a comparison to the Catholic Church. This was, or perhaps the history of the Soviet Union and the rise of Stalin. This was a guy, David Miscavige, who took every opportunity he could to scramble over the bodies he killed in order to get there. And I don't mean literally killed. I mean people he took out in order to rise to the top. And he had a pretty good plan of how to accomplish that, and he pulled it off because the denominated successes of L. Ron Hubbard, and this, a lot of this gets very esoteric, but like I said, Hubbard wrote about everything. The one thing he never really wrote about was what was supposed to happen once he croaked. And it's odd. Hubbard wrote he would send messages out for Christmas. He would send messages out to all his followers for, the anniversary of the publication of Dissonance. He'd send a message when he discovered that flies, if you pull the wings off flies, they don't fly anymore. I mean, this guy would send and write about every single thing that ever crossed his mind. But it never apparently crossed his mind to send a message out to the world of Scientology and say, look, I am nearing the end of this life, and here is my plan for how Scientology carries on. None of that. Even though once he had died, David Miscavige stood on stage in Hollywood, in the Palladium in California, and said, L. Ron Hubbard has causatively left his earthly presence to move on to a higher realm of discovery and research, and he did this knowingly, and blah, 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 blah. Okay.
He's now moved on to his next level of OT research. This level is beyond anything any one of us ever imagined. This level is in fact done in an exterior state, meaning that it is done completely exterior from the body. At this level of OT, the body is nothing more than an impediment and encumbrance to any further gain as an OT. Thus, at 2000 hours Friday, the 24th of January, AD 36, L. Ron Hubbard discarded the body he had used in this lifetime for 74 years, 10 months, and 11 days. The body he had used to facilitate his existence in this messy universe had ceased to be useful, and in fact, had become an impediment to the work he now must do outside of its confines.
The people that were with Hubbard when he died were not David Miscavige. David Miscavige had not seen Hubbard for 5 years or 4 years or however long. There were only 4 people that even knew where Hubbard was in the last days of his life. That was Pat and Annie Broca, a guy called Steve Fouth, and Hubbard's doctor, Gene Denk. And the 2 Scientologists that were supposed to, or that Hubbard had chosen to be the people that were with him, because Steve Fouth was a ranch hand. He was like a handyman. Annie Broca and her husband Pat were the 2 people that had been, and Annie had been with Hubbard since before I arrived with Hubbard in 1973. She had been a long-term, loyal Hubbard aide. And she was obviously the person who should have taken over from Hubbard because she was the one that he had chosen to be with her at the end of his life. And it wasn't even his wife. His wife wasn't there. None of his kids were there. He didn't see anybody, just those 4 people, and not David Miscavige. But somehow, David Miscavige managed to not only convince the people who potentially were in positions of authority who could have taken over rather than him, but also the world of Scientology, that he was the chosen one, that he was the person who was chosen by L. Ron Hubbard to succeed him. And that's not true. That is absolutely not true. And eventually I will get around to writing a book and laying out all of the details of this, because a lot of this stuff is not known, and not known by even people in at the top of the C organization, unless they were around at the time that all of this went down. and also were privy to some of the background information about what was going on, they don't have a clue. They only have the story of the rise of David Miscavige according to David Miscavige and the propaganda campaign that he has waged since that time to convince everybody that he is the true anointed and enormously successful leader of Scientology in the wake of L Ron Hubbard.
He took the power. I mean, he just went in and bulldozed everyone and said, "This is me." And he had people backing him, I suspect. He probably made pacts with people saying, "Look, help me get here. I'll help you get here." That kind of stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, to some extent. Those who were loyal to him in the initial stages of this were sort of lauded and given special treatment and privilege. Ultimately, all of those people ended up getting wasted by him in typical Stalin style. You know, you use people for as long as you can, and then when you think that they're becoming too threatening to you, you get rid of them. You destroy them and their reputation and whatever. And you know, I don't know. I haven't listened, unfortunately, to the interview you did with David's dad, but I suspect that he at least gave some insight into the personality of David that would make you understand.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, it isn't just like a fantasy. His own flesh and blood said it. And this is why I wanted to ask, because getting to the next question about Shelly Miscavige, which I think is an interesting one, a lot of people have this piqued mystery curiosity about. I want to mention that. Where were you in all of this? Like, what was your role in this David Miscavige taking power role? Were you someone important? And were you actually kind of like sitting on the fence? Or how did you play a role in any of this?
Well, this was also during a period of incredible growth for Scientology in the early 90s. Obviously, we didn't have internet back then. Same as Watchtower, same as Jehovah's Witness. They had incredible growth. We're talking like 7-8% growth a year. Scientology also had really good growth in the 90s. Obviously, now with the internet and so much bad exposure, we'll get into that later. Their membership has just tanked. But great question, Derek. I'm interested to hear what you have to, your input, Mike.
Yeah, I was, there was a lot of things going on at that time, and a lot of them were upheavals in Scientology. There was an enormous number of lawsuits that had been filed. There was attacks from L Ron Hubbard's oldest son, his estranged oldest son, seeking to claiming that Hubbard was being held. He was either dead or incompetent, and that he had a right to his inheritance. And there were a whole series of lawsuits, and there were government investigations. And I had come in to take over sort of the legal department of Scientology. So I was pretty much full-time employed dealing with the legal threats. And then as you alluded to, David, in the mid-90s, the internet did come to the fore, and the foolish action of Scientology in response to that, at the insistence of David Miscavige, suing a number of people who had placed confidential Scientology materials on the internet, resulted in a whole new world of hurt, of litigating about the rights to have free access to stuff. And that sort of began another downhill slide, and the beginning of Anonymous, because Anonymous went after Scientology as a result of that.
Yeah.
But so I was sort of preoccupied with all of this stuff. On the other hand, was I taking a side? I got to say, I was supporting the Miscavige side of the equation because the world of Annie Broker and Pat Broker was distant to me. The world of David Miscavige and the legal arena and all the lawyers, and he used a bunch of those lawyers to help eradicate the threat of Pat and Annie Broker, by the way. Particularly a lawyer by the name of Monique Yingling and her husband, Jerry Pfeffer, who were Miscavige's personal lawyer. Jerry Pfeffer was Miscavige's personal IRS criminal investigation lawyer who was representing him when Miscavige was being investigated criminally by the IRS. In any event, I was much more in that world of the legal arena, the lawyers, and supporting Miscavige at that time. I believe that he was doing what was the right thing to do in order to protect Scientology. I'm very sad about that, in that Annie Broker was one of the people who I felt the most loyalty to in Scientology, because she was someone that I'd known her much longer than I knew David Miscavige. And the two people that supported Annie Broker primarily were a couple called Richard and Vicky Azenran. And Vicky Azenran had been someone that I had sort of almost raised in the Sea Org. She'd come into the Sea Org and I was her boss. And I think that if I could look back with 2020 hindsight and, go back to 1984 and start all over again, I would have been fighting much harder for Annie and Vicky to prevail in the battle with David Miscavige for the heart and soul of Scientology. I don't know that anything would be that different. People ask me often if someone other than David Miscavige had taken over Scientology, would it be a kind of gentler activity? And, I think that the answer to that is a qualified yes. It may be a little kinder and a little gentler, but the truth of the matter is that David Miscavige is the epitome of the perfect clone of L Ron Hubbard. He is, if Hitler had the Aryan, the Hitler Youth and the rise of the purebred Aryan as his goal, and if he had wanted a purebred Aryan to take over from him upon his demise, that would be the same relationship as L Ron Hubbard and David Miscavige. He is the perfect example of Hubbard teaching, Hubbard nurturing, and Hubbard guidance about how you go about attaining power, retaining power, controlling and dictating to people what and how they should live.
I think his last public appearance was on CBS or NBC in an interview in 1992. He was interviewed. Was that his last kind of public appearance? He was defending Scientology. Was that the last time he's come out publicly to say anything about Scientology?
David, that wasn't only the last. That was the only. That's the only time. He appeared with Ted Koppel on Nightline.
Yes, I saw that.
ABC. Yeah. And
ABC, yeah.
And he did one interview like that. And subsequent to that, he spoke to the what was then the St. Petersburg Times, now is the Tampa Bay Times. And that's really it. He has studiously avoided the media in carrying on in the footsteps of L. Ron Hubbard. I mean, Hubbard also did a disastrous media interview, Granada TV, on board the Apollo, where he famously said, "I have no second wife," and, "Oh yes, only a madman thinks he's not."
For instance, right now they say we're breaking up marriages. What? That's a lie. As a matter of fact, they're saying that at the moment when you've got this book, which was just about to go on the press, is How to Save Your Marriage, because it contains thousands of successful marriages.
How many times have you been married?
How many times have I been married? I've been married twice. And I'm very happily married just now. I have a lovely wife and I have 4 children. My first wife is dead.
What happened to your second wife?
I never had a second wife.
What Hubbard said happens to be untrue. It's an unimportant detail, but he's had 3 wives. He did have a second wife, Sarah Northrop Hubbard, from whom he was divorced on the 12th of June 1951. He has at least 3 other children. What is important is that his followers were there as he lied. But no matter what the evidence, they don't believe it.
Do you ever think that you might be quite mad?
Oh, yes. The one man in the world who never believes he's mad is a madman.
Mad. And he had a very low opinion of the press and the media. To begin with, Hubbard had a lot to say about the press and the media and about how the press was going to make Scientology known. And, you know, he did interviews with a bunch of people. He did this interview with this guy called Phelan from the Saturday Evening Post, and Hubbard was pronouncing how this was going to be the greatest thing. And he'd charm the pants off this guy, and he was eating out of his hand, and he was just going to be, this was going to be the shit. And the article came out and it was like, well, and and at that point, Hubbard started writing about how the press are the merchants of chaos, and that everything about them is bad, and kick them down the stairs and throw them out and ignore them and don't ever do anything with them and blah, 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 blah. So, and that was always tough being the Scientology spokesperson. I mean, I was sitting there going, you know, wait, Hubbard says I'm not supposed to be talking to these people. What are we doing? But like Scientology today, if you can find a spokesperson for Scientology who is willing to go anywhere on TV or even on the internet these days, I will give you $1 million, because we tried on the Aftermath to get anybody from Scientology to come on. Like, literally, guys, every single episode we asked, will you send someone to respond? We would love to talk to anybody. We have a standing invitation. We do the same thing, Leah and I, on our podcast. We're like, anybody, if you want to come on here, just give us a shout. We'll happily talk to any Scientologist. We'd love to talk to any Scientologist. Bring anybody. Send us Kirstie Alley. We'll take the nutcases. We don't care. Anybody. It's fine.
It's funny you say that, because I actually, after the Ron Miscavige interview, I contacted, I did my best to pull all my powers to contact Scientology head office, send them the YouTube link, and invited them to come on to, to verify what Ron was saying, to give their side of events. We want to give them to give them a fair shot at responding. I did get a reply back, believe it or not, but it was basically just like, we'll get back to you and
go f*** yourself.
Yeah.
We have a saying.
I tried my hardest, because that would have been fascinating, obviously, to have someone from Scientology respond to David Miscavige's dad, what he had to say on MythVision. That was a long. I knew it was always going to be a long shot, but you tried.
Long shot.
That'll never happen. Yeah, we have a saying, they can't handle the jandal, and I think they're concerned that they're only going to. No media is better than a mistake happening to them, and they're like, we'd rather just no show than show up and something happens. I got to take you back though, Mike, because we had preset questions we want to ask you, and no interview I've ever done that's powerful and good ever goes according to plan. They kind of go into whatever is necessary to get into. You mentioned the abuse as you were talking about your, what we call a deconversion happening, that waking up, they call it, or whatever you want to give the term to. In the light of you having family, you got right to that, and then we took you to another place.
Right.
That dilemma, you choosing between this that I've built, my children, my wife, my family, my life in Scientology, and getting beat the shit out of, people around me are getting beat the shit out of, and I have to publicly lie. So there's not only the level of like, I'm lying to myself, and dissonance became aware in your own thinking, but also your pride. I mean, like, just being a man at all, like I suspect multiple things, tsunami wave just came and hit you. And I say that to say, finish off that on what happened. And then I want to know where Shelly Miscavige is.
Okay. So what?
We all want to know where Shelly Miscavige is.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, but your listeners or viewers are going to have to wait for just a moment.
Right.
Come back after this ad from our sponsor.
Batteries not included. Just kidding.
What happened was David Miscavige made the ultimate decision for me, because shortly after that run-in with John, who, by the way, has became a very dear friend of mine. In fact, he and his wife flew to the United States to attend my wedding.
Wow.
In 2013. So after that run-in, I'm still supposed to be dealing with, or quote, handling the BBC and Panorama, et cetera, et cetera. And Miscavige is becoming increasingly disturbed about the fact that this show is probably going to air, and that maybe it's going to be a big attack on him personally. And you got to understand that the attack on David Miscavige personally was far more concerning to him than an attack on Scientology. That he would have his reputation sullied was of much greater concern than the fact that Scientology might be dragged through the shit. And because of the questions that Sweeney was asking, he was worried that this was going to be the focus of the show. And in fact, John told me afterwards, that was going to be the focus of the show. He just couldn't get it through his legal department. And that's a whole nother story. But the show finally airs, and I'm still in London because you can't watch the BBC outside of the US. I mean, people weren't that sophisticated to use VPNs back then, and et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, oddly, the United Kingdom has this weird system of the BBC is supported by your television license, and it's basically a tax that allows, because you have a television license, you're allowed to access the BBC. So if you look on BBC, even today, you can't air a lot of their programs outside of England. You can't watch them even. And it's gradually eroded, but just so you know, back in the day, you couldn't do it. And so I had to sit there and watch this program with David Miscavige on the phone from the US going, what are they saying? What are they saying? What happened? What happened? And it gets all the way to the end of the program, and there's no mention of Miscavige physically beating anybody. And I'm like, whew, okay, I dodged a bullet here. And of course, at the end of the thing, I'm like, yep, and there was no mention of that and blah, blah, blah. Oh, you fucking piece. That show would never have aired if I'd been handling it. And I'm like, okay, like, you just can't win. Wow. And then he sent an internal memorandum to the guy who was in the UK that was his, golden-haired child of the moment, a guy named Bob Keenan, and said, and with a CC of this message, he wrote to Bob Keenan with a CC to me to make sure I got it. Dear Bob, Rinder's an SP. he's going to be sent to Western Australia, or the place that's farthest away from anywhere. He's never coming back to the United States. If he needs something, it's like, I can't even remember the exact wording, but it was like, nobody wants this motherfucker around them. He's just trouble. You see, he couldn't handle this. He can't handle anything. He's been fucking up forever. And, you know, I'll give him $10. I'm not that unkind. And if he needs money, he can sell his body on the street.
Oh my gosh.
What the heck?
And I went, okay, well, that pretty much took things out of my hands. And I literally, Bob Keenan, shortly thereafter says, you need to go back. We were in London. You need to go back to St. Hill, which is the headquarters of Scientology in England, which is a property that's out in the countryside with a bunch of security guards and cameras and fences. And, you know, I knew if I went back there, I probably was not going to be able to escape. And so I said, okay, I'm on my way. And I was supposed to go catch the train back to East Grinstead to get to St. Hill. And I walked out the door and got on the tube and never went back. And that was the end of my career in the Sea Organization. At the time when I left, I believed that David Miscavige was the source of all the problems, and that Hubbard and Scientology, the sort of philosophical principles of Scientology, were still cool, that this was still the shit, and that it was just a problem of some bad guy who had taken over and was doing things that were unacceptable. But, you know, if Ron was around, that wouldn't be happening.
So you were kind of like physically, we call it in the Jehovah's Witness ex-community world, POMI. You were physically out, mentally in.
Correct.
Would I be? Yeah.
Absolutely. No, 100%. 100%.
POMI, yeah.
And it stayed that way for some years. It takes a long, long time to... you know, one of my good friends says it's peeling the onion. You have to peel the layers off. And as layers come off and as you remove yourself from the environment, the influence, the people who keep, you know, that peer pressure, that social pressure on you, you start to be able to truly think for yourself. And it's funny, you know, Scientology very cleverly made a big pitch back in the 80s and 90s that using that slogan, think for yourself, and that Scientology teaches you to think for yourself. And this is one of the all-time most astonishing lies that has ever been told, presented as, obviously everybody knows this, and come into Scientology and learn to think for yourself. And in fact, it is the 100% opposite.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say, and we need to know where Shelly is, but I was going to say the same thing happened to me in the faith. It was really how all these other people misunderstood the biblical account. And so, you know, they just don't understand what they don't understand the truth of it. There's bad people who represent it. That's all. And then I started to like look at the text and went, what am I looking at?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Where is Shelly? Shelly, last I knew, and probably still to this day, is at a Scientology facility near Lake Arrowhead in California that is known as, internally within the organization, is known as Twin Peaks.
Yes.
But it's located at Rim of the World, and it's also known as Mile High. It's like got various names, but this is a very secret location. that the vast majority of Scientologists, unless they are on the internet or have watched the aftermath or various other things, which they're absolutely forbidden to do, that they don't even know this place exists. And it is owned by the Church of Spiritual Technology, which is one of the three organizations at the top of the Scientology hierarchy, those three being the Church of Spiritual Technology, Religious Technology Center, and the Church of Scientology International. The Church of Spiritual Technology is an organization that was created specifically to receive the assets from L. Ron Hubbard's estate and use those assets to preserve L. Ron Hubbard's teachings for eternity. And the Church of Spiritual Technology is an organization that takes Hubbard's writings and lectures and everything he ever did and said and turns them into what is believed to be indestructible format. And what that entails is taking all these writings and etching them on stainless steel plates, then storing those stainless steel plates in titanium containers that are filled with argon gas, covering them with the same material that was used for the tiles on the space shuttle and these reflective metal blankets, and put into racks inside vaults that are dug into the ground, like these big, long, huge vaults dug into the ground, so that these materials will be available in the event of a nuclear holocaust on Earth, that they will survive, and that anybody that comes along after the nuclear holocaust has happened will be able to unearth this wisdom and recreate society.
Or if the angel Moroni comes along and reveals to a prophet that there's these plates somewhere, and you can dig up these plates, and there'll be a new anyway.
Exactly.
Dum 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 dum. Many people believe Joseph. Dum 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 dum.
And I'm saying all this with a sort of a smirk, but to Scientologists, this is deadly serious.
Oh, I can imagine it's deadly serious.
Just like the plates,
Just going on Shelly Miscavige. She didn't go. She wasn't. I don't know if she was invited or not, but she didn't attend Tom Cruise's wedding, and if I'm not mistaken, and I think Leah actually kind of made a little bit of a. Leah asked, "Where's Shelly?" And she got into a bit of trouble for that. She got reprimanded.
She got into a lot of trouble for that. A lot of trouble. But let me just go back. I know I get off into these meandering stories to explain things, but this property is one of 6 properties that are owned by CST in various locations. They have these vaults in various places, but this one happens to be the closest property to the Golden Era Productions facility, which is where Shelly was the last time anybody saw her. And it is the place that is sort of the headquarters of the Church of Spiritual Technology. And it has incredibly good security. It has cameras and fences and lights and all this stuff and motion detectors. And it is also guarded. It's very remote. It's like in the forest. And there's 2 houses across the street that the Church of Spiritual Technology also bought and installed 24/7 private security guards to watch the front to make sure that Shelly never got out and make sure that nobody ever came in. And in fact, when I went up there for the Aftermath show, one of the guys from in the house actually came out and I had a little conversation with him. Hey, dude, you work for Talon? Talon is the name of the private security company that hires all these people. And Shelly, I believe, and I haven't talked to her, obviously, since that point, but I was one of the last people to have a conversation with her before she left. And it was a sort of a very strange conversation. I'd known Shelly since she was 12. She was like Annie, one of the original people back from the Apollo that I knew that had worked with Hubbard. I believe that Shelly is not, maybe initially was taken there up to CST and was unhappy about it and not believing that she should be, treated in that fashion. But I believe that she has been so brainwashed and immersed in the world of Scientology since she was a very small child. I mean, she was 11 when she arrived on Hubbard's ship and worked directly with him. And I believe that Shelly remains absolutely loyal to L. Ron Hubbard, that she believes that L. Ron Hubbard is going to come back and reveal himself, and that she will be vindicated at that point, and that she is hanging on for that to happen. That's what I believe. Now, that's just my belief, but that's why I think we're never going to see Shelly make an escape.
If any viewers want to see a kind of like a tour of Twin Peaks, 60 Minutes actually went there. Not 60 Minutes America, actually 60 Minutes Australia actually went there, did a tour of Twin Peaks, and I was like, you've got barbed wire, you've got security cameras. It's like a compound jail. Like, it's just insane. That's 60 Minutes Australia. It's a fascinating, piece of journalism if you want to just see what the Twin Peaks is like. And that's where you believe Shelley's being kind of, or lives, or being held captive. We don't know. We just, she could.
Well, Lawrence Wright entitled his very brilliant book, Going Clear, Scientology and the Prison of Belief, because the truth of the matter is, you can put up all the fences that you want. You can have cameras. You can have rules and restrictions and security guards and motion detectors and et cetera, et cetera. If someone really wants to leave, they will figure out how. You're talking to one. You talk to Rinder Miscavige. There are a bunch of other people who have figured out how to get out. If you're desperate enough, you'll get out. The problem is the mind aspect. That's what really keeps you there. Look, those physical things, those physical restrictions may be a deterrent while you're like in a turmoil about, should I go, should I not? I want to go, I'm not sure. I want to get out, but, if you make it difficult, that threshold has to be much higher of determination to leave. It keeps people to some extent, but it's never going to keep anyone who is absolutely determined to get out.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Mike, when you left, and they did this to Ron, and they did this to Marty Rathburn as well, did they kind of, when you left, did they harass you, spy on you, like kind of follow you around? Like Marty goes on about this, Marty Rathburn, we might get in, if we got time, we might get into him just very quickly later. But when you leave this cult, they don't just you can't just leave on peaceful terms. You know what I mean? Like, no. These guys are psychotic. Like they hunt you down, Ron.
Yeah, you alluded to fair game before, and that's what that is.
Right, okay.
The practice of destroying Scientology's enemies, the people that they denominate as enemies, which is anybody that says anything they don't like. And, just the same as Marty or Ron, I've had private investigators follow me everywhere. They followed me to Australia when I came to Australia to do a show with Brian Seymour.
They actually followed you internationally?
Yes, they followed me to Ireland. They followed me to England. They took my garbage. They installed cameras outside of my house in the birdhouse. They have done a sort of they put GPS tracking devices on my cars. They sent spies. Jeez. They rented houses across the street to spy on me and install
Similar to Ron, they did that to Ron as well, yeah.
Right, and that stuff has sort of died down. I think that they got a little tired of me taking videos of it and putting it on YouTube, or it's showing up in TV shows or whatever. But these days, the fair game is primarily online. And you will see these very expensive campaigns that they run to try to smear anybody who speaks out about them. I mean, we documented this on the Aftermath. Every time we did a show, we would always write to Scientology and say, look, we're interviewing this person, and, how do you respond? And will you send someone on? And this is what they have to say every single time. So they had a forewarning of who was coming on the next episodes.
Right.
And as the episode aired, or even sometimes before, when they hadn't even seen what the person said yet, they would put up a new website, who is Ron Miscavige? Who is Mike Rinder? Who is every person that appeared on the Aftermath was smeared on an internet site, or many internet sites, or many more than one internet site. And, because of the Aftermath, Leah and I have had a lot. And they do all these videos. They get these people to come on and say, oh, I knew Leah Remini and she was mean to me. And she
just leading into that, I think Derek wants to actually ask you just about your daughter, because prior to you coming on, we watched a YouTube video of your daughter. It was just, I could barely watch it, to be honest. It was really heartbreaking. I can only imagine how you feel.
Let me lead up to it, because thing I can only speak for me, Mike, and I'm a recovering drug addict. It's been 5.5 years since I was injecting heroin into my veins. I was a really, really lost puppy for many years, as addicted to opiates. But I also was extremely fanatical as a Christian. I was just a very, very Bible thumping, the way I viewed the world was a horrible type of reality that I was living in. And I had this addictive behavior, which made me personally neglect my wife and kids. Like, I wasn't there like I could have been, even if I wasn't doing drugs when I was religious. Like, my focus wasn't to be there and love and cherish the moments with my kids all the time. The next step was, how do I progress and become smarter and wiser with God's word? And how do I debate these people for 10 hours and argue on how I'm right and you're wrong? And I did this for a very long time. And today I know I'm like the dad that they never knew. And they're really happy to have me. And I'm so glad that I made it there. So I say that to say, maybe you could comment on it. There was like a 2-minute video. They used your daughter as a pawn. We know that she's utilized in this. It's not like one day she calls David Miscavige and goes, listen, you need to put me on there. I can't wait to speak out. Like, they know that this show that just came out and all that you guys are doing to the church, hey, listen, we need you to come up here. Your dad is damaging the church, and you know the truth of Scientology. We need you to speak out. And sure enough, here she is talking. But she's trying to say you weren't there. You weren't there when she got in an accident. You didn't care. And so I said that about me on purpose, because I know that my commitments my family wasn't the primary commitment. They were there, but they weren't my primary. It was the religion or the drug. Do you think there's any truth to any of that, and saying, look, I was so focused on Scientology, maybe I could have been a better dad, but she's really hyping it up and playing it out like I'm a bad person, and that's not true? Or
I can't think of a time in my life that Mike Rinder was there when I needed him, or when when he could have been there or should have been there as a father. When I got hit by a car when I was 8, he wasn't there. I don't think I ever saw him. I don't have a picture of ever seeing him the entire year of recovery. My grandparents came from Australia. My mom was there. Every second that I woke up in the hospital screaming or needing somebody or something, my mom was there. And he wasn't there when my brother got cancer. He didn't give a hoot about him. And like I said, this shield is a perfect example. He's holding it up to protect himself. But behind there's a black skeleton. And that shield's going to crack. And if anyone really looks just right around the shield, they'll see the real Mike Rinder under there. Because he's there and he's awful.
Like, what? Take us into your daughter.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Okay.
Like,
Yes, I do. There's a lot of aspects to this, Derek, I appreciate your being so forthcoming about yourself too, because it's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to admit your failings and to do so publicly. So, that takes some balls, and good for you, man. And
thank you.
And I'm so happy that you cured yourself, like whatever it took, however you got there.
If it weren't for Dianetics. No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly. But you got to understand that I told you, my daughter and son, my eldest daughter and son, were born into the Sea Organization. They weren't just born Scientologists. They were born into the Sea Organization. So I didn't raise them at all. Not from the day they came out of the hospital. They went into a Sea Org nanny nursery and were raised by the nannies. My wife and I worked all day, every day. We didn't do normal family things. We didn't raise kids. We didn't eat with them. We didn't do their homework with them. We didn't do anything like that. None of it. They were complete. In fact, when my son, Benjamin, was 11, he used to live at a ranch that was near Golden Era Productions, where all the kids of the Sea Org members who were at Golden Era Productions, they lived there. And we would go there and see them once a week on Sunday morning, if we were lucky. I was not even in at Gold at the time. I think I was in some other place, maybe Denver, or fighting one of the legal cases. And Miscavige decided he was just going to close down that facility, that it was a problem, that it was causing bad PR. I think a German TV show showed up and was trying to film there and blah, blah, blah. So my son, who was 11, was sent to live in Clearwater, Florida. Like, that was not, this wasn't are you okay with your child being sent off to go live, on the other side of the country by himself without a parent? Is that fine by you? No, it was just that he was designated, he's going to Flag. Some people are going to Los Angeles. Some people are going somewhere else. My daughter, she was brought to Gold when she was like 14 and just put to work because she was old enough to work, whatever. And so those children of Sea Org members, and Sea Org members are no longer allowed to have children. This was forbidden in sort of around this same time because they were viewed as a distraction to Sea Org members doing their jobs. Neither Taryn nor Benjamin were raised by me nor their mother, although now their mother is, because she's still in the Sea Org, their mother is the most wonderful person who has ever existed. Now, I tried to get Taryn and Benjamin and my ex-wife, Kathy, to speak to me after I left London. I left London and I ended up going, whatever. I tried to get them to come. Kathy responds to me with a handwritten letter that says, I received your message. Fuck you. I'm filing the divorce papers. I'll tell the kids. The only communication I had from them subsequent to that was a series of letters that were sent by every member of my family, including my brother and sister and mother and nieces and nephews, all saying, you're an asshole, you're a suppressive person, knock off what you're doing, stop doing this, you're hurting us, blah, 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 blah. And then my brother, that daughter, Taryn, and my ex-wife, Kathy, along with 4 senior officials of Scientology and 2 private investigators, showed up to ambush me when I was standing in the parking lot of a doctor's office where my now wife was seeing the doctor.
Your daughter, you piece of shit! You know about Mischavige? No! What you I don't care. You deserve it.
I can, I'm afraid. Who's that?
I happened to be on the phone with John Sweeney of the BBC at the time when these people approached me. And that recording is on my blog, it's on the BBC, it's on YouTube, and it is pretty astonishing. It's these people that walk, that, you know, I'm going, hey, John, guess who just showed up? I'm standing in the park, and guess who just showed up? It's this and this and this and this. And then you hear the screaming say, you mother, and they're all screaming at me, and I'm like, you know, okay, guys, calm down, calm down. Okay, this incident became so loud and so outrageous that the doctor came out of her office and asked me if I wanted the police called. And I said yes. So she called, and the Pinellas County Sheriff shows up. And of course, the Scientology executives who were there all disappeared. When they heard the police were coming, they ran. My daughter, my ex-wife, my brother, and one other person remained for the sheriffs to show up. And the sheriffs came, and they interviewed everybody separately, and they did this whole thing. And they concluded that, and my wife got a graze on her arm. And they had been I was trying to leave. I was trying to get in my car and just drive away because they didn't want this shit. And she got a graze on her arm. And so they called the paramedics, and the paramedics came, and she said that the graze was like on a pain scale of 0 to 10, it was a 2, and they put a Band-Aid on it, and she refused any further treatment or to go to hospital. The sheriffs wrote a report after interviewing everybody and said they had followed me there, that I was trying to leave, that there was incidental contact that had caused this graze on my wife's arm while she was trying to hold the door of my car from being closed by me to get in and leave, and that there was no further incident. Now, today, Scientology, and there are a bunch of now documented, like gone through and taken all of this. Now, this Taryn, my daughter, is saying, and it's Justice for Mum is her website, and Mike Rinder Wife Beater
I've seen
is
it.
my
that,
hashtag, and they have turned this into a massive campaign, and now it has morphed into I cause permanent neurological damage. My daughter says she could hear the bones shattering and breaking, that like this bizarre story to attempt to create the idea that I'm a nasty, unreliable, wife-beating asshole.
A narrative that you're,
Exactly, who nobody should take seriously. And despite the fact that this has been documented up one side and down on the other, that it's all just lies, they just keep doing it.
Mike, you mentioned you just mentioned your blog before, which is we'll put the link in the comments in the description. Sorry, MikeRindersblog.org. You have I love what you did on your blog, an open letter to your family. I take it they would never have read it just based on Ron's testimony when he came onto the show with us, because Ron just by fluke managed to get a Kindle and he got internet access. And you mentioned that Annie, I think he found out that Annie, they said she was alive, but she'd passed away 6 months ago. Right. So I take it that obviously, I mean, I love that you've got the open letter to your family there, and one day I really hope that they read it, but I take it they just don't have internet access. I take it they never would have read it.
No, I'm pretty sure that they haven't. And if they did, they read it through the eyes of a good Scientologist.
Mm-hmm. Right.
This is just propaganda. This is all lies, everything,
North Korea style,
You can't convince someone who is a dyed-in-the-wool brainwashed cult member that what they believe is wrong. It doesn't matter how much proof you offer. In fact, it's almost the more proof that you offer and the more apparent it is, in some ways makes it them more certain that they have to keep like fighting so that everybody eventually sees the truth, because it's like going to destroy their entire existence and their entire universe if this is pulled to pieces somehow. So they have to hang on. And, you know, it's the same in the Jehovah's Witnesses, David. I know from speaking to these guys, they're like, you know, Armageddon is coming, Armageddon is coming, Armageddon is coming, and Armageddon doesn't come. It's like
just around
the corner.
You know,
We've got a new truth that's been revealed now.
Yes,
and it's actually, and you know, there's always an explanation, and there's been a bunch of sociological studies that have shown that in these cults where what is predicted doesn't come true, it makes the people more convinced. And I watched. There's a documentary about Heaven's Gate that's pretty interesting, and that was very apparent in there. Like,
Mike, I'm reading this book called Cognitive Dissonance, and there's a scholar I love on MythVision. I want to say, man, this has been a fantastic show so far. Like, I love what you're saying here. I would love to do this again too. I just have to say that. But Cognitive Dissonance, this book's titled that, and it's about the apocalyptic predictions and expectations. Now, notice something. It's not, if you ever get this book, it's a red book. It's written in like the 70s, 80s. It's not about the Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not about these other cults. This is particularly in the Bible, right?
Right.
And so the Jews were anticipating certain things in the Old Testament. I don't want to get too far lost in this because this is a Scientology show, but I just want you to kind of get the gist. When it didn't happen, a prophet all of a sudden had a new word from God. An angel said, well, it wasn't 70 years. The Lord said 70 times 7. Daniel comes along. And then there's this new prediction. And then the New Testament comes. And then what happens? Well, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day. So cognitive dissonance, to me, the reason they do that, Mike, just to put it in a nutshell, you experienced it, David experienced it, I experienced it. Yeah, deconverting, waking up, becoming an SP, and really having to peel the layer of the onions off is a form of death. It is almost like, who wants to die? Not me, not you, not David. We all want to live. And having to face death, the death of your universe, the death of your ideology and philosophy, whatever, that is the tough part. So we need to wrap this up because we're already getting to an hour and a half here, and I want to do this again, you know? So David, you have any final words you want to say to Mike? And then Mike?
Okay. We just touched on Scientology's official worldwide member count. It's pretty low. But Mike, if you had a crystal ball, what's your prediction for this organisation going forward? How do you think this is going? I mean, they're loaded with cash. Their members are dwindling. Like we mentioned earlier, North Terrace, they got a great property all over the world. No one's actually in there. How do you see this? How do you see this organisation going in 5, 10, let's say 20 years? Like, where's this organisation headed?
Down the drain. I don't think that there is any hope for the future of Scientology. But as you said,
just while I'm at it, sorry to butt you in. Do you think people are still actually joining this religion cult? Do you think actually people are still joining? No, I didn't think so. No.
And if so, very, very few, and they probably don't last long. Unless they have no ability to Google, Google is the death of Scientology, and
same as Jehovah's Witness,
And I think that 5 years, 10 years, whatever, they do have a lot of money, and it takes a long time to to dissipate that money, and they're still making money. It's like they've still got a lot of wealthy members who are giving them a shitload of money. So they may not be making more than they are spending now, but it takes a long time to spend $3 billion. I don't care who you are. It takes a long time, and it takes a long time for the most diehard believers to, if they ever do, to come to their senses. I'm not sure that they ever will. The hope that I have is not the end of Scientology. I don't give a shit. I don't care whether Scientology continues to exist or doesn't. What I want is an end to the abuses and an end to Scientology being subsidized by taxpayers to do things that they shouldn't be doing, i.e. fair game, and taking money from people under false pretenses and then refusing to give it back. And that's what I like. If Scientology was just a benign little cult that was off, I'm not sure that benign little cult is really appropriate. I mean, that's probably an oxymoron. But if Scientology was more akin to some self-help group that people, you can go to a Tony Robbins seminar and think that you're going to be king of the world, and but you're not going to go out and start hiring private investigators to look into people who were at the last Tony Robbins seminar and said I got nothing out of it. And you're not going to. So Scientology could continue to exist, and probably it should continue to exist in the realm of the great marketplace of ideas. There is room for everything and everybody, in my view. Like, I don't think everything about Scientology is wrong or bad. There are things within it that are perfectly acceptable and perfectly good. They just have a veneer over the top of them, which is evil and is based on taking advantage of people. And if you could get rid of that, then those fundamental ideas, you can believe in the virgin birth, you can believe in Angel Maroney, you can believe in anything you want. You can believe in Dianetics and engrams, all of that shit. Anybody can believe anything they want as long as their beliefs don't then result in them harming people.
Thank you, Mike.
Their tax exemption status is under review in Australia, by the way, just recently. There's a Sydney Morning Herald article I was going to share, but I know we're running out of time. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show. We'll put the links in the description, MikeRindersBlog.org. Guys, please go to MikeRindersBlog.org/donate. Mike is doing incredible work in the activism field. You need to keep going, man, because you and Leah are doing incredible work in exposing this really harmful cult, and we're really grateful for the work that you do.
Well, thank you both for having me on. It's been kind of a blast.
It really has.
Very enjoyable.
Mike Rinder, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you guys, go to the description, check out their podcast. Him and Leah are killing it. Seriously. And I mean that on YouTube. They need more subscribers. So go subscribe to their YouTube, because they've got tons of them on our other podcasts. But I mean, like, your podcast on many platforms. So I want everyone to go subscribe to your YouTube channel as well. For sure. And thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
David Samuel, thanks for tuning in. Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, if cognitive dissonance has you forgetting, we are MythVision.